haven't brushed my hair. That must mean it's time for another writing video. Salutations, welcome to Loving the Language of Literacy. My name is Sophia Lee, and today I will be telling you how I write poetry. This is literally an idea I thought about, 20 minutes ago. I know personally if I was scrounging the internet as a beginning poet, or maybe even just one that's stumped, I would definitely like to know this information, and I'm very excited to share it with you. A little disclaimer before I start, I am not a published poet, and I am in no way saying this is the right way or that there is a right way at all to write poetry. These are just my own ways that I approach it, what I do, and any tips and advice that I have that I have accumulated over the time that I have written poetry. And to be honest, I didn't seriously consider myself or seriously start writing poetry on a daily, several times a week basis until around this time last year. I still am very much a novice, and I will probably be spending my entire life as a student of the craft of poetry. By the way, this is my own poetry notebook, which I have been working on since November of 2015, and I just recently reached the halfway point. The three factors that start off any poem that I write are the reasons and or circumstance of me writing the poem. The first one being if I am supposed to, which basically means in any sort of setting, be it a classroom, a conference, an after-school club, where I'm basically told, you should be writing poetry, here's a prompt, have fun. Scenario number two, when I am not supposed to be writing poetry, and this basically means when I am in some sort of place, most likely a classroom, that I don't want to be in, and I either get some genius idea or I just don't feel like listening to the teacher. And I have to admit, I've had some brilliant poems come out of this. And scenario number three, when I am merely sitting down either with the intention to write or I get the sudden inspiration to in the midst of something else. I've been known to drop everything I'm doing, including my global homework, to work on an idea for a poem that just came into my mind, or if I am just sitting down and saying, Sophia, you need to write today, this is the foundation of becoming a writer, you should really write. Like right now. The second element in me writing a poem has to be the inspiration, and I'm sure this is where a lot of people get stumped and don't really know what to do. I get my ideas from a multitude of places. The first one being prompts. There are so many of them out there, be it on Twitter, Tumblr, Pinterest, etc., that you can easily type into Google and search for. And then there are the type that I am in a specific class or workshop for poetry when they are mandatory, and sometimes they work well, sometimes they don't, but the whole purpose of them was to get writing. And I have found from both personal experience and observing other people that sometimes when you dislike a prompt and don't want to follow it, the best poems come out of it, mostly because you are starting off with a certain angle and then rebelling against or completely disregarding altogether. In terms of me playing good cop, bad cop, I will just be sharing with you this Orson Scott Card quote. Pause for my dramatic quote reading. Everybody walks past 1,000 story ideas every day. The good writers are the ones who see 5 or 6 of them. Most people don't see any. Basically what he's trying to say is you absolutely have no excuse if you are a living, breathing human being, and you should plop your ass down to write a poem. Other ways that I get inspiration to write poems are if I have maybe a line or a concept that didn't quite work out in another poem that I've written, and I just try my best to approach it from a different angle. And sometimes, this is actually really cool when it happens, I'll be writing a completely different poem, and a line that maybe was put into a failed poem actually sneaks its way into this one, or maybe I even go back in my notebook to look for it, and that's what I just find so magical, that something that I thought was completely homeless in terms of being a line of poetry finds its home somewhere. Another method which I'd recommend in certain circumstances is line stealing. I go to the Young Authors Academy. I literally have like 15 videos on this channel explaining it and the whole process and the magicalness behind it. But basically one of the highest compliments there is if you claim that you will steal steal a line from someone when they are reading their poem. And this really can be from anyone or anything, but as long as you are not copying, unless you're giving them credit, like one single line, or maybe just the premise behind it, I guarantee you it will be different because you are your own person, you have had your own experiences, and there's no way, unless you're trying, that you could end up with the same poem that that person wrote. Some other factors that have inspired me in a lot of my poems actually are questions and concerns in the back of my mind, and just things that I've had or maybe even carrying with me for an entire day, a week, whatever. Whenever I'm sitting down, be it for any three of the ways that I start writing poems, it just comes out and either intentionally or unintentionally infuses its way into my writing. And of course, as the teenager and basically human being of this planet, there are the poems that are driven by emotions. Most of the time these are extremely strong and passionate, having to do with opposite ends of the spectrum like love and hate. Two things that have been featuring themselves in poems since the dawn of time. Then there is the narration. This is probably one of the biggest factors on the initial writing of a poem, because I can feel within the first few lines or just the first stanza itself exactly what narration and what voice I'm trying to have when writing it. And of course, the classic ideas are first person with the narrator speaking. I say narrator because just because it's first person does not at all mean it has to be written by you as the writer personally speaking to the audience or reader. You will come across, and I've read so many different poems where it's writing from the perspective of a chair and it uses the pronoun I because it's writing from the chair's perspective. With second person, I usually classify it into active or not active second person. And when I say that, I mean whether I'm having a constant other character being referred to as you, and this may be an actual person, this may be society, or I just have the general you, where I just say, you might know this, you might know that. So I'm either incorporating the actual auditor, listener, reader into it, or maybe I'm not. But either way, there is the pronoun used, which is of course the marker of second person. Then of course there is third person, and I've heard from a lot of different writers that third person is used a lot when you're trying to distance yourself from whatever the subject of the poem is, whether it's you yourself turned into she, he, or whether it's writing about a different person or object or thing that you happen to give a gender pronoun to. Sometimes there are combinations. I literally just wrote a poem this afternoon where I had around half of it in quotations using I and the other half using she, talking about the person that is speaking. I've never done that before, but mixing it up can be extremely fun. In the vein of writing third person, I actually have learned, both in terms of analytical essay writing and poetry, the pronoun we can be used in third person, but most of the time when I use it as a poet, I pretty much use it in terms of second person and just we should do this, we do that, we as the general society or group of people that are doing this terrible or maybe very good thing. Then there is, in my opinion, one of the most important factors, and that is, are you writing this poem to be read or are you writing it to be spoken? Because the two have such a vast difference, but the best poems can be absorbed either way. Just because it is meant to be spoken aloud does not at all mean it has to be slam poetry if that's what's scaring you. And just because it's written doesn't mean it has to be a long epic like something that Homer has written, because we all know my sister's read the Odyssey and the Iliad and I haven't. One last thing I like to think about in terms of narration is whether there is an active auditor or not, whether you are breaking apart to talk to the reader or listener themselves, or whether you're just meant to be on the sideline. Then there is structure, and this is something that you don't have to think about at all when you're writing a poem, but you also have the option of maybe going into the poem with a specific structure. When I'm talking about that, I mean the divide between free verse, which has absolutely no known rhyme or reason to it, and the shape and the form, and then there is the classic style poem like a cinquain, a limerick, a sonnet. You know the drill on those ones. We've all been forced to write them in elementary school. And from there, These are some decisions that you make usually while you're just writing the poem, but they have to do with capitalization. Are you the type of person that capitalizes the first letter of every sentence? Do you capitalize anything at all? Do you capitalize just pronouns? Do you capitalize every letter at the beginning of a line? It's completely up to you. It also has things to do with line breaks. Maybe you'll rhyme, maybe you won't. I wouldn't actually recommend going into a poem specifically thinking that you have to rhyme or have a certain rhyme scheme, just because I find it very constricting myself. It all boils down to the level of complexity with which you want to approach the actual form and look and structure of your poem. Then we have to talk about, of course, writing the darn thing, which I have to admit can be extremely difficult at times. My average for writing a poem, if I'm just sitting down and writing from beginning to end, is anywhere between 15 minutes to half an hour. I've known to get poems down a lot quicker, for instance, walking onto the bus. Or, this is probably the record, I started a poem literally in first period at around 9 in the morning and didn't finish it until 4:30 in the afternoon. Obviously I wasn't writing the entire time, but I had to have breaks and I was interrupted quite a lot while writing that poem. Then, of course, we have to talk about the two mediums in this modern day and age. I'm sounding like an old person. Good old-fashioned pen and paper, or the computer, or iPhone, or iPad, or whatever other device you might have. I personally have and probably always will write poems by hand, just because poems are something that you really need to be able to work around with and visually see and cross out and move things around, versus, in my opinion, prose, where there's a lot more freedom to, on the first draft at least, throw up every single thing you could possibly be thinking. To write poems, environment is actually a huge factor. Most of the time I'm sitting down, otherwise my handwriting turns so terrible that I probably can't even read it when I go back to revise. Maybe I'm listening to music, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm in a cafe kind of situation, maybe I'm jotting it down in the middle of class. So whatever environment I'm in, whether I like it or not, it will somehow infuse itself into my poem in sometimes unexpected ways, because I can draw really random inspiration from the people, the things around me, the colors even, like this lovely, what do I even call this? Curtain I have behind me. And then, of course, if it is writing to a certain prompt or picture or trigger that has gotten you going, I will have that in front of me on my computer just for me to refer back to when I'm writing it. Something that I like to think about right before I go into the revision stage is, what was the goal or the purpose behind the poem? What am I trying to get across to the reader? Am I trying to answer a specific question or a prompt? Am I trying to voice my opinion about something, or maybe even give a voice to an important social issue or injustice in the world? Am I trying to stress this specific emotion and personify it? Am I trying to tell my own story or someone else's? Or am I trying to dedicate this poem to someone, or have I even written it for someone else? Because those can actually be extremely interesting poems. Something to think about, especially when you're revising and you don't know exactly what to pare down or what to cut out. I would definitely keep it in mind. And then, of course, there is the, for me personally, dreaded revision stage. I have enough trouble writing the darn thing to actually go back and see how I can make it better. That is just, it's very hard for me, I gotta admit. What I think about is the goal behind writing the poem, conservation of language, which is probably one of the biggest dividers between prose and poetry. If you can say it in any fewer words, you definitely should. I also like to pick up on patterns I may have used, whether they might be alliteration, accidental rhyme, or maybe even just things that sound alike, or themes in the poem itself. I like to consider the structure in terms of the actual shape on the page, whether I want it centered, whether I want it all to one side or the other. And then my personal favorite is enjambment, and this is one of the biggest dividers between what I would consider a person who knows exactly what they're doing or has a lot of experience in poetry. Again, not trying to claim that there's one way or another to do it, and I haven't gotten to the stage yet either. In the very beginning, I was so puzzled as to why some poets that I know personally write their poems as if they were writing notes. Like this, if you can see this right here. There's no line breaks or whatsoever. But the thing about the really good poets is that when they go back and revise, they literally put in lines or dashes or whatever to distinguish the line breaks, because enjambment is everything, both when you're reading and you're listening, because there is such a divide between what your eye sees and what your ear hears, and the pauses and breaths and the stresses on syllables and everything else that goes into absorbing and experiencing a poem. I might want to mention what it is before I talk anymore. It basically means when you are breaking a line somewhere in the middle versus at the end of a sentence. The best example I've ever been told, and was actually my introduction to the concept of enjambment, was this one sentence, which was actually, "I want you." That was the end of the line. Perfectly happy, right? Next line down, "to die." That gives obviously an entirely different meaning to the poem. Wow, we have gotten through all of my steps to actually writing a poem. Because we really would have been here all day if I had included my tips that I've learned in the past year of writing poetry. And you can go check it out if you want to know everything that I have learned, and basically just a lot of sappiness with a few extra tips in there. Tell me in the comments below if you enjoyed this video, if you'd like me to make more like it. Too bad, I'm already gonna make more. I have so many different poetry videos to plan. I just want to say really quickly that I've had quite a huge booktubing slump in general, and while I do love books so much, I love reviewing, I love discussing, I love reading in general, I do definitely want to have the option of making Loving the Language of Literacy a writing channel as well, because I myself am a multi-genre writer. I write every single day, or at least try to, and it's what I want to do with my life in general, even if my actual career profession ends up being something completely different. And I would just like to have you hang on for the journey and tell me any of your thoughts, opinions, or what you're currently working on, or if this video helped you at all. I would love to know. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Keep calm, read on, and I'll see you in a video very soon. Goodbye. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe. All my social media is at SSL with Books, and my previous videos are below me.